Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We are going to stall for a few seconds while we wait for people to log on. You are here for the State of College Recruiting, What the Emerging Workforce Really Wants with Stephen Rothberg. Hey, Stephen.
Hey Ashley, good to talk to you.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. We're really excited about this. We are, like I said, stalling for a second. People are still logging on. Do you mind going to the next slide?
Sure.
So while we wait, we'll just go over a few items. We're almost there. For housekeeping, just so you know how everything works here, you are in listen only mode. That means you can hear us, but we can't hear you. Please share. We're live. Go on any social media site, share with the Our Daily hashtag, and let everyone know where you are. Just because we've started doesn't mean they can't join. Also, ask questions. Please don't be shy. Use the questions panel to your right in the sidebar to speak with Stephen. We're recording. You will receive a copy of the slide deck and recording after the webinar, so please keep an eye on that inbox. Stephen, do you mind going to the next slide? Thank you. And we want to send a big thanks out to Great People who made this possible today. If you don't know, Great People is a talent platform for the enterprise, revolutionizing the way organizations attract, engage, and hire the world's best talent. So check them out. We have a special offer from them that will come to your inbox afterwards and is very relevant to talking about Gen Z today. So, Stephen, do you mind going to, thank you. Like I said, we're here with Stephen Rothberg today. You will probably be much better at introducing yourself than I will be, but to get started, you are the president and founder and visionary of College Recruiter. I love that you refer to yourself as a fully recovered lawyer. That's brilliant. So when did you found College Recruiter? Was that 1991?
Yeah, so I founded the company that College Recruiter grew out of. We've morphed a few times over the years. I wouldn't use the word pivot. That's kind of more of a startup where they're in business for 6 months or 2 years and they find out that it's not working. And then, they take a hard right or a hard left or whatever. But our business has sort of gradually evolved over the years. Way back in 91, I started a micro business. It was basically just a couple of people, and we were publishing campus maps for the University of Minnesota and some other schools, and gave the maps for free to the schools, sold the advertising around the borders of the maps to local apartment companies, retailers, some employers like United Parcel Service that hired a lot of students. And then a couple of years later in 93, added an employment magazine that was called College Recruiter. And in 1995, one of the career service office directors at the University of Minnesota said to me that there's this thing called the internet. And she said that she didn't know what it was. She said she'd never been on it. Looking back, she actually had been. She just didn't realize it because she was using email. But she said that a lot of her students were using the internet to look up company information before they were interviewing on and off campus. Back in that era, for those of us who have some gray hair and or even losing hair, the way that you found a job when you were a student included going into the career service office, and you would open up file drawers and look at annual reports. So if you were interviewing with Honeywell in 23 minutes, you'd go and you'd pull the annual report and flip through it so you knew what the heck Honeywell did before going into your interview. Thankfully, those days are long since past. Now we have LinkedIn, Wikipedia, sites called, what's it called again? Google, things like that.
Well, I think that it's wonderful that you're on with us today, walking us through Gen Z. And obviously you are the authority here in what the emerging workforce really wants. So thank you for being here, for introducing yourself, and I'm going to hand this over to you.
Awesome. Well,
Thanks,
thank you so
Stephen.
much. Yeah, and just for the people who are listening live, for the people who are listening to the recording, too bad. But the people who are here with us live today, definitely use that chat function, like Ashley was saying. She and I talked before the presentation. I'm one of those people who is more than happy to be interrupted and to answer questions as we go. And it's always sort of fun to get a question that's thought-provoking, or maybe I didn't explain something well, somebody has a difference of opinion, chime right in. You can hopefully see my contact information there in the lower left. Definitely feel free to reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn. At the bottom center is my Twitter handle, @Stephen Rothberg, and then the hashtag that the good folks at Recruiting Daily would like us to use is #RDaily. So if you're tweeting, posting stuff to Facebook, MySpace, whatever, just use those. So in today's session, we're going to talk about the different generations a little bit. Not going to take up a huge amount of time on that, but I do think it's important for context. There'll be people who are listening in on this webcast who might have differences of opinion about exactly what birth years constitute which generations. I'm going to make some gross generalizations about the different generations. I'm sure that there will be attributes, if you're a Gen Xer like me, that you'll look at that and say, well, that's not true of me. And that's probably true. They're generalizations, they're stereotypes. But in some ways, they are helpful for us to sort of better understand the generational differences. I am one of those people who I believe in generational differences, because when we come of age, typically our 10, 12, 14 years of age, what's going on in the world at that time is very, very formative. And what happened when I became 10, 12, 14 years of age was different than when Ashley was 10, 12, 14 years of age. So it shapes us as people. Of course, what's happening with our immediate family and the city in which we live, that also impacts us. And what happens to somebody in the US at that age is probably quite different than what happens to somebody in Africa. So these are not things that we're born with. They're not cast in stone. But I think that they are helpful to employers as they're trying to figure out what's generally important to different age groups. What's also important to think about with generations is that some of the differences, it's not so much due to the generation, it's due to simply how old you are. I'm 53. What matters to me at the age of 53 is very different than what mattered to me at the age of 23. My generation is the same. I'm a Gen Xer, but at the age of 23, I didn't know my wife. I certainly didn't have kids. I was at the very beginning of my career, and what was of interest and what mattered to me then is very different than what is of interest and what matters to me now. We're then going to get into Gen Z, which is the current generation that is in college today and for the next few years. For those employers who are struggling to try to figure out how to recruit and retain millennials, that ship has sailed. The oldest millennials are almost 40. And so if you haven't figured out that age group by now, you're definitely behind the 8 ball. We're going to talk about the job search priorities of Gen Z, what matters to them, what doesn't matter to them. And then towards the end, I'm going to do a shout out for a handful of employers who I think in a lot of ways are both being brave and doing an exceptionally good job with recruiting this generation. So in summary, we have 4 different generations in today's workforce. You'll see a very, very small number of people from what's called the silent generation. Those are the people who were born in 1945 and earlier. There just aren't that many of those that are in the workforce because by and large, they're, 80, 90 years of age. So, you do run into a few of them. One of our good friends actually is 109 years of age, and she volunteers several days a week and lives alone. And she is, and I say this in the best possible way, a freak of nature. But the reality is by the time you get to 80, 90 years of age, it's very, very unlikely that you're working or volunteering. So we're really not going to talk too much about them. The reference to the shh is because my wife is a baby boomer, and she doesn't like it when I say that because that just makes her feel old. I'm a Gen Xer. I'm a few years younger than she is. We clearly are the greatest generation ever to have existed. And I say that sarcastically. The next generation, there's been over the years a ton of attention paid to them. What some people call Gen Y, other people call millennials. I tend to refer to them as millennials. This is the generation that my oldest son belongs to, my oldest kid. He was born in 1994. We have 3 kids. His brother was born in 1996. So by birth year, according to the Pew Research Trust, my middle kid, the one born in 96, would be a millennial, but a lot of the stereotypes about the 2 generations, he is much more of a Gen Zer. Our youngest is a daughter. She's 20, born in 1999, for those who aren't super good at math. And she is without a doubt a Gen Zer. And not just her, but also her friends and the life experiences that she's had. During today's presentation, I'm going to jump back and forth a little bit between sort of talking about groups as a whole and then also just talking about individuals. Again, every person is different. Somebody may have been born in 2001, and what matters to them is much more consistent with a baby boomer. So that's fine, but we sort of need to talk in stereotypes a bit in order to generalize and understand what the workforce that's coming into the employment market today is really looking for. So baby boomers were the largest generation. A lot of people will still talk that way. They no longer are. Couple of reasons. One is as they age, unfortunately, some of them are dying. And the other reason that baby boomers are no longer the largest generation is that they did not have the largest number of births. If you go back and total up all of the people who would have fallen within that generation, how many were born, that's a smaller number than millennials. It's also a smaller number than Gen Z. So in history, in the US, that huge generation, the baby boomers, they're actually the 3rd largest generation in history. Stereotypically, baby boomers thought the world revolved around them. And if you think back to the post-World War II era, because Europe and Asia were so devastated by World War II, the US was really the only superpower, and then the Soviet Union later, but they were also pretty devastated by World War II. So for a couple of decades, the US wielded an unusually large amount of economic power. And that was when the baby boomers were born. That's when they came of age. It was the first generation where middle class and people in a lower socioeconomic group thought of going to college or university in large numbers. Before that, college and university was basically reserved for the wealthy. The stereotype of a baby boomer is that they lived to work. They wanted that corner office. They wanted that promotion. They valued their contributions to the company in terms of their salary, their job title, et cetera. And you'd see a lot of sort of squabbles within companies, especially large organizations, Fortune 1000 companies, government agencies, whatever, as to whose office was larger, who had the corner office, whose desk was the biggest. Did you have 3 plants in your cubicle, or was there only one room for, or was there only room for one? That kind of stuff, I think, thankfully, is mostly a yesterday issue, and it's just not that important to millennials, and certainly not to Gen Z. Baby boomers far more comfortable with face-to-face communications than electronic. Makes sense. They didn't grow up with electronic communications unless you can consider landlines, corded landlines, as electronic communications. And they valued loyalty in both directions. As employers stopped being loyal to employees, and let's be honest, it was employers who started that, then that kind of left baby boomers in the lurch. But this was the first generation to enter the workforce that expected to retire from the same company that they started with, but almost never did. Prior to that generation, it just was not at all unusual that when you finished high school, or maybe you were one of the rare ones that went to college and graduated, that you would get that job and you would be there for 30, 40, 50 years and maybe gradually work your way up, but you were loyal and your employer was life loyal back to you. Just doesn't happen anymore. Next generation, the one that I'm a member of, Gen X, we're often the forgotten generation. And one of the reasons for that is that the birth rates for this generation were far smaller, about half of what you saw with baby boomers. Baby boomers dominated the workplace so much, and they stacked up the managerial and executive positions within organizations, that a lot of Gen Xers couldn't advance into those most senior level positions. And then we're also being pressed from underneath, because millennials for a time were the largest generation, and they are the largest generation in the workforce today. Millennials are. So Gen X has always lived our lives in the shadow of baby boomers, and a lot of baby boomers, people who are, say, 60, when they think of the next generation, they will often talk about millennials. And got news for you folks, there is another generation. I'm in there. We also stereotypically did the work to live, but we valued a little bit more balance in our lives, or at least talked about that. More of my generation, the dads would have been more involved with, carpool and emptying a dishwasher and doing laundry and the so-called household chores than the stereotypical baby boomer. Also, far more Gen X women were in the workforce than in previous generations. And some of that was just an economic necessity. Some of that was that education was no longer, again, reserved for the wealthy, and in some areas primarily reserved for men. When one of my grandfathers went to medical school, there were no women in his medical class. Today, about 60% of physicians and lawyers who are entering the workforce are women. A lot has changed in just decades. Gen X, stereotypically, we tend to be more independent. We came of age where we saw our parents losing their jobs, sometimes by choice, sometimes not. And so we grew up in an era where we knew that we needed to be more independent, that we could not depend upon our employer to provide everything. We grew up in an era where pensions were unusual. Baby boomers grew up in an era where pensions were the norm. And so we've had to be more resilient financially and in the workforce. We grew up in an era when the movie Wall Street with Michael Douglas was celebrated. Greed is good. And you had corporate raiders like Michael Milken breaking up companies without a second thought to what would happen to thousands or tens of thousands of employees. We grew up in an era where the air traffic controllers that went out on strike in the early 80s, when they were just all fired. some of whom later hired back, but that attitude of employers towards their employees was markedly different for Gen Xers at a similar stage in life than it was for baby boomers. And so we also grew up to question authority, to not just accept that when an employer said, you know, I'm going to be loyal to you, you can trust that. We questioned that. Even if your manager truly meant that, if that company was acquired or divested, there's only so much that a manager can do for you. And then you're on your own. So the millennials, a lot of people will say that they are the largest generation in history, and that's not true. Gen Z, actually, there are more Gen Zers than there ever were millennials, but the millennials are the largest generation in the workforce. It used to be that baby boomers were, as they aged up, and there just simply weren't enough Gen Xers, then gradually over time, millennials started to become the largest generation. The oldest millennials are now, I think, 38, 39 years of age. The youngest are in their mid-20s. So these, by and large, are your lower to mid-level managers in large companies. These are not today's college students, which I still sometimes hear employers talking about college students and equating them with millennials. There certainly are millennials who are, say, 31, 32 years of age who have gone back to school, no doubt. And heck, there are people who are in that silent generation, the 80, 90-year-olds who have gone back to school too. They tend to be the exception rather than the rule. Millennials were kind of the first generation to embrace digital communication. They were the first ones to have access to social media. They were the first ones to have widespread access to being able to use email in the workforce. Before that, email and the ability to access information online in your workplace was unusual. Now it's normal, and millennials were definitely pushed towards that substantially, using laptops, iPads, whatever. They are seen generally to be very collaborative. I think of that as a change in teaching style. When baby boomers went to school, K through 12, the way that the subjects were taught tended to be very one-way, teacher to student, and there weren't a lot of breakouts where the kids would sit around in circles. They didn't do as many group projects. There were some, but not as many. So that the effort towards educating the populace to collaborate is something that was much more popular for millennials than it was for Gen Z, and certainly for older generations like I'm sorry, not Gen Z, but the boomers and Gen Xers. They're seen in the workforce as being bright, whatever that means. I think that is not a reflection on intelligence, but it's more about knowledge, and that comes with being a more educated generation on average than previous generations. Millennials work to live; they don't live to work. So they understand that they need to make money, and they've had some significant financial hardships hit them in their careers. The Great Recession of 08, 09 that really lasted into 2010, 11, 12, just decimated their ability to earn good money. If you graduated from college in 08, 09, you gave up hundreds of thousands of dollars in earning potential over your career, because if you would have gone into a job in 06, 07 that paid, say, $25 an hour, 08, 09, very strong chance that you were getting half that, 12, 13 bucks an hour, because you couldn't get that professional job in your chosen career path. And once you start off at 12 bucks an hour, even if you get really great raises year after year after year, you're just never going to catch up to that person who graduated a year before and was making 25 bucks an hour. And so this generation has learned to live with a lot less money than previous generations. They don't have the same expectations. That doesn't mean they don't have the desire, but they don't have those same expectations. And they exhibit very little loyalty towards their employers. It took a generation or two for that to catch up, but employers taught their employees not to be loyal. Employers were disloyal to their workforce and saw them as human capital rather than people. And after a few decades, the people started to reciprocate, and it's not at all unusual for a millennial employee to jump ship for an extra buck or two an hour, not because they want to hurt their employer, and then sometimes there's that, but because they're just trying to make ends meet. They're trying to make their bills, pay their bills. So Gen Z is the generation that we're here to talk about today primarily. These are the youngest workers. If your employer is hiring like part-time retail workers and you're hiring high school juniors, seniors, college freshmen, sophomores, etc., then this is who you're hiring. By next year, it's going to be 20% of the workforce. So if you haven't started to come to grips with what needs to change for this portion of your workforce, you better start. They're rapidly replacing the baby boomers in your workforce. This is the first generation that I would call to be digital natives, meaning that they don't remember a time where they didn't have a computer, laptop, notepad, cellular phone. They don't remember their parents without cellular phones. They might remember their parents with flip phones. My youngest, who's 20, remembers my wife having a flip phone and me having a BlackBerry, and my BlackBerry had a little trackball on it. And I was pretty early with technology, but she doesn't remember a time when her parents didn't have cell phones. She doesn't remember her grandparents not having cell phones. And so to her, that's just, of course. Now, I mean, if you talk to somebody of that age, of course they know that people didn't always have cell phones, but it was just the norm. That's what they grew up with. Sadly, and this third one really bothers me, is that this entire generation has grown up in war. That we have been at war as a nation for as long as this generation has been alive. My daughter was 2 when 9/11 happened, so she has no memories of the U.S. Being at peace. That's a very different attitude than when I was that age, and or when slightly older, like millennials. There were lots of times during those generations where we weren't at war, or at least it wasn't a hot war where there's actually like fighting going on. War and economic strife, the economic strife largely from the Great Recession, 08, 09, those are very formative experiences. Some of this generation had older brothers and sisters, older cousins who went to fight in Afghanistan and Iraq. Some of those people didn't come back. Some of them came back forever changed. This is the reality for them. They don't know a time at peace, whether it's peace in terms of war or peace in terms of economic prosperity. They tend to be very active learners, meaning that they seek out information, and they tend to be better communicators than previous generations. A lot of previous generations will poo-poo that and say, well, that just try to have a conversation with them. You can't do that. And I've turned that around a little bit, and it's like, how are you having that conversation with them? If you want to talk with them by phone, they're not as skilled at that at the age of 20 or at the age of 15 as previous generations, but they're much better at communicating with dozens of people simultaneously, or coordinating plans with 14 of their closest friends to go to a movie, to go to a bar, whatever. Previous generations really struggled with that. So the newer generation, the Gen Z, they're better able to communicate quickly, directly with a large number of people, and that changes the workforce dynamics. Rather than having to win people over to their point of view one-to-one, they can do it on a one-to-many basis far better than a baby boomer could. Again, stereotypically. And it's a very creative generation, not just like art, literature, music, etc., but they also use that to connect with each other. YouTube is, I think it's the second most popular site in the world, basically video, also music. It's not at all unusual for a member of Gen Z to spend far more of their time on YouTube than they are watching television. They don't actually see it as being all that different. And to create their own videos, their own music, and to upload it. TikTok is one of the most popular websites in the world, basically a lot of short videos, overwhelmingly Gen Z users. So if your place of employment is not using sites like YouTube, regularly uploading short videos, 1, 2, 3-minute videos about specific jobs or your company cafeteria or what you did for like an all volunteer day, start that. Encourage your younger staff members, for example, to shoot some very, very short videos, 10-second videos. What do I love about my job? Kinds of things. Or it's Burrito Tuesday at my company. Look at how great they look. That kind of stuff matters. They tend to be far more mature. I hear a lot of people, older employees, Gen Xers, baby boomers, complaining about how immature Gen Z is. I would urge you to look in the mirror, the way back mirror. If you're complaining about the maturity level of a 20-year-old in your workplace, think about, honestly, think about what you were like at the age of 20. So I don't think that maturity level about them maybe showing up to work late or not following through on an assignment or something along those lines, I don't think that that's so much of a generational issue. I think that that's more age-appropriate behavior. And by appropriate, I don't mean that I'm condoning it. I'm just understanding it. One of the reasons I think that they're a very mature generation is that they have the lowest usage of drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and pregnancy. As compared to previous generations. And that's despite the fact that this is the first generation to have that are in today's workforce that has in many states legalized marijuana. And in the states where it's not legal, it's often just miles away across the border. So it's far easier to obtain legal marijuana than it was 10 years ago and certainly 30 years ago, and yet this generation has lower usage of drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and a lower pregnancy rate than previous generation. I definitely see this with my kids and all of their friends. They are far more likely to be minimalists, meaning that they don't want to acquire stuff. They don't want that thing to put on your desk. They don't want to, they don't care as much about a knickknack if they're traveling and bringing home a souvenir. If somebody brings them some collectible, it's like, what am I going to do with this? Part of that is that they don't have the money and they anticipate that they won't have the money to live someplace where they're going to have the room to display that. And part of it is it ties you down. If you have a big house with a big mortgage, and a couple of dogs and whatever, you aren't going to be able to travel the world as much as if you just live in an apartment with a couple of roommates and you can disappear for a week and, go hike through a rainforest. They're much more into experiences than they are into things. So employers, when it comes time for holiday gifts or recognition, rather than giving them some kind of an object, a book, a trophy, something to display, think about giving them an experience, giving them movie tickets, giving them a pass to a climbing gym or something along those lines. That is going to matter a lot more to them. And Gen Z, contrary to what I think is the popular opinion, they are very, career focused. Why are they so career focused? Because they need to be. You're going to hear me talking over the next few slides about sort of what the difference between wanting to be a certain way and needing to be a certain way. They need to be career focused because they got to pay their bills, and their bills are far greater than previous generations, primarily due to the absolutely out of control tuition and resulting financial aid. So one of the things that I think is really interesting about Gen Z, because they've grown up with pervasive electronic communication, smartphones, tablets, Wi-Fi, etc. When you talk to a typical member of Gen Z about the internet, they have a very different way of looking at it than my generation and certainly older generations would have. When I was 20 and wanted to go to the internet, basically I was logging in through a desktop computer using a dial-up modem and connecting to, I think I was using CompuServe at the time. So it was someplace that you went. It was like using a landline. If you wanted to call somebody, you had to go to your phone, pick it up, dial, and then talk to your friend, next door or halfway across the world. The internet for Gen Z isn't a place, it's like air. They've grown up with the internet being instantly accessible at their fingertips 24/7. So you don't go to the internet, it's not a place. It's just like air, it's all around you. Their expectation in the workforce is that it's all around them. I can't think of a single employer today that prohibits their employees from using their personal smartphones unless there's a substantial security risk. But 10 years ago, it was not at all unusual for employers to block access to YouTube. Today, you hardly see that at all. They want very badly to make a positive impact on the world. And again, this goes along with the experiences. This generation volunteers far more than any generation in history. They see climate change as being an existential threat. They see artificial intelligence as being an existential threat. And so they're willing to work for it. Previous generations might talk about climate change. My generation might be concerned about it in the sense of it being inconvenient, that we have more hurricanes than we used to, that the temperature here in Minnesota fluctuates more, our summers are hotter, our winters are colder. That's an inconvenience thing. But for members of Gen Z, that are 20 and they're looking ahead 33 years, they're wondering if they're going to be able to live in Florida. They're wondering if the fires in California are going to prevent them from living in huge sections of California, whether their lives are going to be at risk. And they care far more about their friends and their peers in terms of opinions. What do those people think and say? They're far more likely, when considering where to work, what job to take, whether to quit, whether not to quit, whether to work harder, come in on the weekends, whatever. They care far more about what their friends and peers would say than previous generations. And again, I think some of that goes back to the disloyalty. If your employer has shown you that they don't care about you, and your friends show you that they do care about you, who are you going to pay more attention to? They have a lot more choices in just about every facet of their life. If you want to buy toothpaste and it's 1982, you went to a pharmacy. Maybe you bought it in a grocery store. There wasn't Target. I don't even think Walmart existed in 1982. If it did, it was mostly in small towns, big box stores on the edge of towns. So just buying something like toothpaste, you really didn't have that many choices. And the number of brands that you could purchase and the types of toothpaste, whitening and gel and mint and whatever, there just weren't nearly as many choices. Now you can hop on your phone and you can go to Amazon or any of 1,000 other online retailers, and you can have exactly the toothpaste that you want delivered, on your door tomorrow or even in 2 hours. They expect immediate satisfaction. So if you're an employer and you are still on those annual review kinds of calendars, because that's what your company has been doing since it was founded in 1952, think again. Annual reviews are almost meaningless to a Gen Z, or they appreciate the review. Don't get me wrong. The problem isn't with the review. The problem is that it's annual. Talk to them. If you're their manager, talk to them every frickin' day. Make sure you sit down with them at least once a month. Tell them the good, bad, and the ugly. They are actually going to appreciate it. Now, I talked a little bit before about sort of some of the differences between what they want from an employer and yet what they kind of feel like they need to do or expect to happen. And this is where a lot of the surveys that you'll see that captured, like, the head story on CNN about this survey just came out and says this about Gen Zers and blah, blah, blah. A lot of times they only tell half the picture. And so let me break that down a little bit for you. So 79% of Gen Zers acknowledge that basically they're online all the time, but they feel like they're online too much. So the survey might say that Gen Z is online way more than previous generations, and that's true, but that does not mean that they want to be online as much as they are. 79% want to cut back on their online usage. 71% use Facebook on a regular basis, but 82% of them are careful about what information they share. I could learn a thing or two. I share way too much. Where I am, what I'm eating, what my opinions are on politics, whatever. You look at a typical member of Gen Z, and they do a lot more lurking. They go to Facebook to see what their friends are doing, but they don't share nearly as much about their lives as do previous generations. 68% are very comfortable buying from Amazon and other online retailers, but basically the same percentage would prefer to do that shopping in physical stores, especially if they're family-owned stores where they can go and they know that their spending is staying in their community and making a difference in the lives of the people in that shop. So although this generation might be very, very good at finding that dog toy on Amazon, if you gave them the choice between buying that at a local pet shop and buying that from Amazon, they're almost all gonna, 67%, they're gonna prefer to drive that half mile or walk that half mile to buy it at the local pet shop. I do think that this has ramifications to online retailers, by the way. It seems from these sorts of numbers that if physical stores can modify how they're selling, pricing, convenience, et cetera, that we're going to see a return to people spending more money in physical stores than spending online. And finally, on this slide, I find this just to be kind of amusing. Basically half, if you gave them the choice between giving up their phone, their smartphone, and giving up their sense of smell, about half would give up their sense of smell. That might seem kind of odd to some people, but when you think about it, it's actually quite a rational choice. To live in today's society without a phone it would be incredibly difficult. But to live in today's society without a sense of smell, that would be more of an inconvenience than literally an existential threat day after day after day. This generation is thoughtful. They are far more likely to be highly educated. They're far more likely to talk with friends and to think through their decisions, to check in with mom and dad about what do they think about this, what do they think about that. A lot of that is that they've been trained that information is easily accessible, and so they aren't afraid to go and get that information. When I was a kid, if you wanted to do research, you had to go to the library, and the libraries basically were open banker's hours. And so the ability to think through an issue and go do research was much more difficult in 1979 than in 2019. So although they're more thoughtful, they do care about brands, which I think of as anything but thoughtful. Just because something has a fancy brand name on it, I don't think of that as being something that I necessarily care about or want to buy. This generation, the brand matters, but when I look at the stories around this, I think it's far more about the reliability and knowing that if they purchase a brand name product or work for a company with a strong employment brand, that they're more likely to have a good experience than if they bought some off the shelf or worked for a company with a poor brand. And 35% say that if a friend or family member has an old device, God forbid a 5-year-old smartphone, that's not cool. So employers that provide smartphones, laptops, desktops, etc., to this generation as they enter the workforce, please do not do the hand-me-down thing. Don't give them the old computer that somebody is now finished with. Computers are pretty darn cheap now. Get them a new laptop, get them a new tablet or whatever it is that they need for their job. They're going to think of that as not being cool, and that is going to hurt your employment brand, and that is going to hurt your recruitment and retention. 83% of Gen Z cares a lot. They very much want to save money, but only 65% think that they're going to be able to save enough money to be financially secure. They do not think that they're going to have enough money to retire. So although 83% want to save, 2/3 don't think they can save. That's sad. I mentioned earlier that this is a generation that has volunteered far more than previous generations, and this is something that I think more employers could do more with, that have a half day of volunteer service a month, give people time off if they're going to donate blood, if they're going to go teach in a school, allow them to do that on work hours. Every place of employment is different, but there are definitely opportunities in every place of employment to afford your employees the ability to volunteer. At College Recruiter, the company that I founded, we do 2 half days a year. And if an employee were to ever come to us and say, hey, I want to take off a couple of hours because I want to go into my kid's school to help them with this art project or whatever, it's like, done. Don't put that down as PTO. That's paid time. We're going to be very flexible with that. 26% of Gen Z volunteer regularly. I think that number will greatly increase as they age up. As the youngest members of Gen Z, they're not even close to being able to drive, and it's pretty difficult to volunteer when you're 12 years of age. 48% care about the poor and the sick. That's a big difference from previous generations. There's certainly lots of people in every generation that care about the poor and sick, but not half where they care deeply enough to actually do something about it, rather than just pay lip service to it. Socially, they're far more progressive than previous generations. And this is something that's not just true in the US, by the way, this is almost globally. 80% support same-sex marriage, and 30% of Gen Z would take a pay cut if they to go from like your place of employment where they do not believe in your mission to a similar job with another employer where they do believe in the mission. So think about that in terms of your difficulty in recruiting and retaining members of Gen Z. Maybe it's not the members of Gen Z that are the problem, maybe it's your corporate mission. So marketing to Gen Z, this is more on the recruitment side for those of you who are trying to bring more of these folks into your workplaces. Think about snackable content. very short content. When YouTube came basically into popularity and employers started to post recruitment videos, I'm guessing that the average employment video was probably 3.5 to 5 minutes. That was very normal. I still see that length by a lot of employers, but Gen Z's attention span has shrunk significantly as compared to previous generations. When we're talking to employers now and encouraging them to provide us with a YouTube link so that we can embed their YouTube video into their job postings on College Recruiter, we're looking for a video that's no more than 1.5 minutes. If we see a good 45-second employment video, that's going to be the one we want. 4-minute videos, they're just too long. And a lot of that is it's the expectations. It's not just that Gen Z wants that, it's that they know they can get it. They can go to Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, etc., and they can see little bite-sized snackable videos that are 7, 8, 9, 10 seconds long. That's all they really need or want. Graphics, videos, text overlays, use more of them. I see a lot of corporate career sites that are super heavy on text, and the only graphics at all might just be the company logo and the stereotypical photo of the happy employees. Instead of a stereotypical photo of the happy employees, use a similar photograph, but add some bullet points to it, because that photograph of the happy employees is going to attract their attention, and then have a few bullet points that communicate the message that you want. YouTube, Facebook, live streaming, huge success. If you're going on campus or if you're doing a virtual event, live stream it. It's free. We do it all the time. And even if you only attract 30 people to that live stream, what's the cost? So you can jump on Facebook, you can jump on LinkedIn does it now, you can easily jump on YouTube and you can do a quick live stream. Walk somebody around your office. Walk up to the sales manager who's probably 27 years of age and ask her, tell me about what it's like to work here. What sorts of people are you looking for? And you can do a very quick 45-second video. You post that to YouTube, you're good. So the live streams also become really good content for the video platforms, for the social media platforms. This generation will share that content. Yes, they're careful about what they share, going back a few slides, but good content that isn't about them personally is content that they're going to be willing to share, especially if it's funny. You'll see popular Instagram posts that disappear quickly. They'll have hundreds of people liking them, and then your friends can see what you've liked. Same thing on Facebook. By the way, with Facebook, a lot of people will say, oh, Gen Z isn't on Facebook. It's just not true. They are. They're just not on it as often, and they're not sharing as much. So like my 20-year-old, very Gen Z daughter, she'll go onto Facebook a couple of times a week. I'll go onto Facebook 10 times a day. So she is on Facebook. She's just not on it nearly as much. And it's important to kind of look at those nuances. Speed of communications, I alluded to this a little bit ago, but the average attention span for a member of Gen Z is 8 seconds. So when you're thinking about a video or a job posting ad or something that you want to communicate to them, think how long does it take to read a text message? Think TikTok, the video sharing platform. Do not be thinking PDF with 3, 4, 5 pages of content. Federal government and other employers that love those 2, 3, 4,000 word job descriptions, they're in a lot of trouble with this. They need to understand that a job description need not be a job posting. You can post a 200-word job posting that highlights the key points and just basically gets people interested enough to go over to your more detailed job description, but the two are not the same. A job posting ad is an advertisement. It's to drive attention, to generate attention. Job description provides much more of the detail. This is a very diverse generation. This generation kind of came of age with Barack Obama as president. I don't really like the word or phrase multiracial. I'm not actually a big believer in race because we're actually all along a spectrum. There's no such thing as a quote unquote race. That's like a species. But this generation, it's not at all unusual for them to see same-sex couples, to see women in roles like medicine that were traditionally reserved for men. But one of the things that does bug this generation are the overt, explicit efforts by employers to brand themselves as being diverse and then to showcase the programs that they have that are improving their diversity. If you have to talk about what you're doing to be diverse, you're not diverse. Become diverse and let your diversity speak for itself. The non-binary reference, again, is like that racial issue. Was Barack Obama African American? Well, a lot of people say yes. His mom was Caucasian. Why do we look at him as he was a black man rather than a white man? Those attitudes are just not shared by Gen Z. They would see him as being quote unquote multiracial, and I hope that there becomes a good term for that. I see a lot of employers still who think of in terms of racial hiring targets. If we're falling behind in the number of African Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans, et cetera, that we want to have in our workforce for diversity reasons, then we need to go to the HBCUs, the historically black colleges and universities, et cetera, the HACUs, the tribal colleges. I'm a big fan of those schools. They provide great opportunities for higher education for underserved groups of our population. But if you think that the only place to hire African Americans are HBCUs, think again. The population of even a school like what I went to, the University of Minnesota, is very reflective of society as a whole. It's no longer the case that the only place to recruit, or even the best place by far, African Americans are the HBCUs. So do not stop doing that, but please stop talking about it as if you've got like one main channel for recruitment and then you've got this other diversity channel that sort of sits off to the side. They should be integrated. It should be natural. The size of the organization, stereotypically, a lot of people say, oh, they just want to work for startups and that's why we can't hire them. Wrong, only 14%. Basically, about the same number would prefer to work for large or mid-sized organizations. Why? Security. They don't have to worry about that startup folding 3 months from now. And the work environment, they do not like that open office plan. And let's be honest, no one ever did. They're much more comfortable with face-to-face communication. So if you're a boomer and you're trying to communicate with your Gen Zers, walk up to them and talk to them. Don't just send out a mass email. They're better at mass emails than you are, but they don't prefer them. And that Gen Z, the older you are, the more difficulty they're going to have in communicating with you. I don't think that should be news to anybody. They just communicate differently. They use different devices. They use different media to do it. A baby boomer is just not going to be as comfortable texting as a Gen Zer. They are far more likely to work hard for your organization, and they definitely want to retire. They are not hoping to work the rest of their lives, but they expect it. And that's unfortunate. I hope that changes over time. They do not look at themselves as being entrepreneurs. I'm going to be the next head of this startup or whatever. Pretty evenly split. If you look back at boomers, it's kind of a somewhat similar percentage at a similar age. They want to move up the corporate ladder. They do want to make more money. They are very concerned about their financial stability and their ability someday to retire. And their priorities in the workplace, really different than boomers. If you talk to a 60-year-old in your workplace, Stuff like 401k, healthcare benefits, that's going to rank far higher on the ladder than stuff like social justice. And yet salary is right up there, and that's going to be very typical for that baby boomer as well. I promised to call out a few employers. These employers have all become either totally or far more school agnostic. They do not care or hardly care which school you attended when they're considering you for a position in their company. So they're no longer restricting their college hiring just to students who go to quote unquote their core schools. If you have an engineering degree and you go to a third tier school in some rural community in the Western US and you apply to work for Lockheed Martin, they are going to be happy to talk with you. A lot of employers aren't, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of employers are struggling, is because you've got 90% of employers going after 10% of the students at the big brand name schools. Also, another newsflash, with the huge tuition that you have to pay at those big schools, a lot of students are choosing not to go to them. They could go to them, but they're going to SUNY schools, State University of New York. They're going to community colleges for 2 years and then transferring credits to a state college so that they can graduate with only $20,000 in debt rather than $200,000 in debt. This is a list of tools and stuff for employers. I can see that we're at the top of the hour, so I won't get into any real details. But these are things just sort of kind of keep in mind for employers. Focus, for example, on who your high performers are when you're looking to what schools to recruit from, what majors to target, where to find your employees, rather than trying to reduce your effective cost per hire. Online assessments are huge and very beneficial if they're scientifically validated. Do not take the word of the assessment company. Look at the studies, look at the data. Do they actually predict the performance of the employee in the workforce? Or does it just kind of sound logical that this person's a linear thinker and so they're going to do well in your workforce? What data do they have to substantiate that? And AI, I think we're seeing a huge increase in the use of AI in the workforce. I'm seeing fewer recruiters in the workforce as a result of that, but the recruiters that are there are doing more meaningful work. You're going to lose a lot of recruiting coordinators who do a lot of scheduling of interviews, for example, but recruiters will hopefully have more time to actually engage in real conversations rather than just push around paperwork. And that actually brings me to the end of the presentation. I'm happy to stick around for questions and answers.
Well, we did have quite a few questions rolling in, but you were extremely clear and answered each question almost right after they came in. So I really appreciate that. That was fantastic. I didn't want to interrupt you while you were on a roll.
Cool.
But do you have time for maybe two questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, just going back to social media, where do you find the most success? Because you did mention that, Gen Z isn't necessarily on Facebook as much, but they are. But we're looking for where you find the most success in communicating with Gen Zers, be it Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, text messaging.
Yeah, I would not call text messaging social media. To me, it's kind of more of a replacement for email than anything else. But, if I was an employer and trying to figure out if I had to put all my eggs into one basket, I'm only going to use one social media platform. Which one would it be? I would say that the question's invalid because it's not, you wouldn't go, if you're going to build a house, you can't say, well, I'm just going to go buy the best hammer in the world and forget all the other tools. It's kind of like an all of the above strategy. Now, the reality is there's certain social media platforms are more beneficial than others. A lot of it depends upon what you're looking to do. So if you're an employer and you're hiring people to work in your retail shop, for example, then stuff like Pinterest, stuff like Snapchat, stuff like Instagram, very visual. that would be fantastic. But if you're hiring engineers, I don't think that Pinterest is gonna be of much use to you. You're gonna want some place where you can provide data, where you can actually walk somebody through a process. And that's where I think a site like YouTube would shine. Show them that new piece of equipment that you just brought on and what it can do. I was just watching a show the other day on YouTube actually about how a company makes snowboards. Well, if you're somebody who is a mechanical engineer and you see the equipment that they have to make snowboards, that's going to be inspiring. But just seeing like a photo that's here today and literally gone tomorrow on some of the other platforms, for an engineer, that's just not going to do it. We're spending far more time now than we were even just a year or two ago investing in YouTube and other video. I like to say that if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a video is worth 1,000 pictures. Hope that helps.
I actually love that. 1,000 pictures. Yes, thank you so much. We have another question that just came in on the same subject. TikTok. It's been talked about a lot as a recruiting platform. How would you suggest utilizing that platform effectively? Is it mostly just for employer branding?
Yeah, so TikTok is a platform that's very intriguing to me. In 2020, we're going to start to make use of it. So this is one of those if you can't do, teach moments. We're not using TikTok, but it's not because we feel like it's a bad platform or worthless. It's because it just wasn't on anybody's radar a year ago. And before we start to allocate a lot of resources into a tool, we want to make sure that those resources are going to be well spent. TikTok is like a micro video platform, comes out of China. There's some controversy about how much access you're providing to the Chinese government and therefore military and intelligence services if you're using it. I don't know how different that is from Facebook, quite frankly, which has demonstrated a desire to sell everybody's data to anybody who is willing to write a check. So I kind of feel like that distinction isn't all that meaningful. But what really intrigues me about TikTok, and I have not seen any employers do this well, if somebody has, please let me know because I'd love to share that socially. We have a couple 100,000 social media followers, and I'd love to give kudos to employers who are using it well. But I think what would be super intriguing on TikTok is a very short little video where you talk to somebody, an intern, why did you decide to work here? And they give you a 5-second answer. Here's what our company cafeteria looks like. Aren't these mashed potatoes great? Just little tiny snippets like that. That's not going to get somebody to apply to your job, but that's not the point. It's more of a branding thing. It's you're building awareness. You're getting people to be intrigued. Wow, this is kind of interesting. It would be kind of nice to go someplace where I know I can get a good meal each day because I'm living in a studio apartment and I share it with a stranger. I don't want to be home cooking dinner. If I can go someplace and have a really nice lunch every day, that matters to me. That I can go with my coworkers and enjoy that experience, or I can picture myself as that intern 6 months from now. So I'm going to work towards applying. It can be experiences that the intern had. Let me tell you how I found my job. What did I do to get the hiring manager to pay attention to me? And they share 6 seconds worth of that kind of content on TikTok. I would love to see if that works. I think it would, but I'd love to see if it's working.
That sounds like actually a really good idea to take advantage of a platform like that to really display culture and just give your organization a chance to communicate without any real purpose, just for the sake of communicating. I mean, obviously there's a purpose. Anyways, I'll shush now. Our next question, and you got a big thank you for that, by the way, from Derek.
My pleasure, Derek.
So our next question is about the gig economy. So there's been talk about the gig economy turning backwards with Gen Z for the sake of stability. And then there's also talk of the gig economy growing. Where do you see that in the next decade?
Yes and yes. So far more Gen Zers participate in the gig economy than older generations. Some people will then extrapolate that to mean that all these Gen Zers, they love being independent contractors and driving their mom's car around to pick up strangers and take them halfway across the city. Quite frankly, I call bull on that. I think that is a necessity. It's not a preference. Think about it from your own standpoint to the people who are listening to this. Would you rather have a stable paycheck week after week and have a pension and know that when you're 65, you'll be able to retire? Or would you rather be a freelancer, never knowing if you're going to have money coming in today or not having any health insurance, not having any kind of pension, let alone a 401k, not knowing if you're one car accident away from being unemployed and financially devastated? It doesn't pass the smell test to me. Now, this is coming from somebody who his oldest son drove full-time for Lyft for 2 years and did so, and it was a good job and it provided a good living to him. But if he had had a choice of doing somewhat similar work on salary, with a pension, with healthcare benefits, guess which one he would have chosen? So I think that the gig economy exists largely because of our financial necessities, not because of our workplace preferences. And I think that employers who are looking to the gig economy as a way of becoming more profitable, I get that motivation, but please don't delude yourself into thinking that the people who are working for you as gig workers are happy to be doing so. They're not. They would rather have the same things that you do: stability, a good income, healthcare benefits. So if they get sick, they're not going to have to file for bankruptcy. Who wouldn't want that?
Thank you so much. And you've got agreement coming in from multiple people on that. They feel the same. We do have another question that just came in. Do you still have time?
Heck yes.
Thank you. How important is company culture for Gen Z candidates, especially those coming out of school and looking to start their careers? Are they passing up job opportunities because the company just isn't a good match?
Oh, this is a great question. Yeah, company culture is very important, and we need to scratch the surface on that a little bit. For as long as there have been companies, there has been employment branding. We used to call it something different, but it's the way that employers communicated to candidates what it's going to be like if you choose to work here. This is what we believe in. Let's be honest, most of it's just BS. Is there any employer out there who has ever admitted that they are a family unfriendly work environment? That we believe so strongly in our employees that we're going to fire you in order to make our quarterly earnings goals, right? Employers just don't do that. It's incredibly rare where they're honest. There are a small number of employers that have invested not necessarily money. Sometimes it's money, but I think sometimes it's just it's culture. It's people from the top down who care about their fellow human beings more than they care about their profitability. You need to care about both, right? If you're a for-profit organization and you're losing a lot of money, at some point that money is going to run out, and then you can no longer afford to pay those people. But if your CEO is making $200 million a year, would it be okay if maybe they made a paltry $120 million a year, and then you could take that $80 million and provide healthcare benefits to all of your employees, including part-timers? That kind of stuff goes a long way. The not just saying you're green, but actually demonstrating that you're green. And in some industries, that's easier said than others. If you're a mining company, by definition, you are never going to be green. There has never been a mine in history that hasn't polluted the environment. It's just a reality. But do you remediate that? Do you clean up the pollution each and every time? Do you have data to demonstrate that? We're better than the other mining companies because they spoil the environment, whereas we extract the same kind of copper that they do, but the data shows that we protect the environment. That I was talking to one of our employer customers a couple of days ago, late last week, and they showed me an internal spreadsheet that tracked how long their average, actually was low, median, and high, how long people had been with the company. And this is a retailer in an area where you would normally have 400% turnover, and this company has thousands of employees, and their median duration of employment was 4.5 years. So they're 16, 17, 18 times better than their competitors. If you're a member of Gen Z or a baby boomer, would you rather go and work for a retailer knowing that in 3 months you're probably not going to be there anymore? Or would you rather go to a retailer where the average employee is there for 4.5 years? What does that say? So don't just say that you value your employees, prove it. Use actual data. When I talked before about the graphics and embedding text into them, that's a great thing to do. If you've got a demonstrably better healthcare benefits than your competitors, tell them not just that, but how, right? Our employees are sick, 12 days less a year than our competitors. Our employees pay out of pocket for healthcare benefits $1,732 less than our competitors. Whatever those numbers may be, and be honest. If you're talking to a Gen Zer, you're interviewing them, whatever, and you've got some areas that you want to get better on, tell them that. Tell them, yeah, you know what? One of the things that we haven't been good about here is employee retention. But our new CEO just put into place 2 months ago this policy. And I think we're going to know in about 3 or 4 months what the impact of that is. But I'm excited because we're doing blank, right? We're now paying people $15 an hour rather than 11.25. And so state it. We're using hard numbers and so to back up that culture.
Thank you, Stephen. So you are getting thanks coming in by the handfuls. We really, really appreciate you being here with us today. Great conversation. Sorry, I was just reading through a question. No, this is great. So I think now that we're 17 after, we should probably call it quits.
No sweat. So all these people who are saying nice things about me, therefore none of them are members of my family. So that's cool.
Well, now you're getting more. So maybe someone's hanging around in the background. Thank you. Thank you so much. You're fine with receiving questions via email if anybody has anything additional to ask?
Yeah, absolutely. So if people feel more comfortable, jump onto LinkedIn, like TikTok videos. If your company's doing something interesting with Gen Z, share it, tag me, put our daily, hashtag our daily into that LinkedIn status update, your tweet, Facebook, whatever. I want to get the word out for this, and I know that our friends at Great People, this is something that they believe passionately about also. So they'll probably want to be sharing too.
Definitely. Okay, well, I think we are going to cap it off. Thank you so much for being here with us again. Thank you, everyone who joined today. Like I said, please keep an eye on that inbox. Thank you to Great People for making this possible, and we'll see you again next week or in 2 weeks, coming on the new year. Merry holidays. Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you, Stephen.
Bye-bye.
Bye.